Alright, I just did this entire video with the mic muted, so I gotta do it again. Kinda mad. Anyway, we're gonna do the facial bones now. There are 14 facial bones. The first one we're gonna work with is the mandible. There are lots of parts of the mandible. First, we're gonna isolate it so we can look at the body. The body is this horseshoe portion which contains the sockets for the teeth. The next part is the ramus. There's two main parts of the body. There's this horseshoe looking thing and the ramus. It's this vertical portion. This vertical portion goes off into two different processes. So there's the condylar process right here that also has the head of the mandible, fits into the, articulates with the temporal bone. It creates the temporomandibular joint. A lot of times you'll hear of temporomandibular joint dysfunction. I actually have that. So what happens is that the muscles around this joint that move this joint become agitated. They get pulled, they get strained, and you actually have dysfunction in this joint where it can slip in and out of socket. So sometimes people have a hard time chewing, talking. I know if I eat something that's too chewy, too tough to chew, my jaw clicks. Sometimes if I move it from side to side, there's not really a lot they can do about that without surgery. I know they recommended a soft food diet for like a month or two for me, but I'm not going to do that, so I'm just going to deal with it. Now this portion over here is called the coronoid process. It is the anterior extension of the ramus, and it inserts into the temporalis muscle. Oh, it's the insertion point for the temporalis muscle. Hold on. This portion, mandibular notch. Okay, this right here. This is called the mandibular notch. It's the notch between the condylar process and the coronoid process. And then you have the alveolar process, which is basically just this portion of the body that contains the sockets of the teeth. Like we were saying before, this is the body, this horseshoe-like area over here. But the superior portion, the top, is called the alveolar process. Then we have the mandibular foramen. It's nerves that are responsible for the teeth in the lower jaw. This is where they inject to numb the teeth. The next bones we'll go over are the maxillae. There is a left and a right. This bone articulates with the zygomatic bone from the previous cranial video. It articulates with a ton of stuff, really. There's the lacrimal bone we'll go over, the nasal bones, the ethmoid, the nasal bones. There is the orbital surface, creates the inferior part of the inferior orbit. Then it also has, let's see if we can isolate those two. It also has an alveolar process. Again, just sockets for the teeth. So this part right here is called the palatine process. You can see where it sticks out. You can see all the sinuses in here. The palatine process is basically just the roof of the mouth, the interior portion of the roof of the mouth. We have the two zygomatic bones. Oh, let's get rid of the multi-selection. Zygomatic bones make up a lateral portion, well, I guess the lateral portion of the orbit. They connect to the zygomatic process of the temporal bone we talked about earlier. Those are your cheekbones. So before we talked about the zygomatic process, on the zygomatic bone, this is called the temporal process. Remember, a process is any part of the bone that's sticking out to connect to something else. We have the two nasal bones, really simple bones. They don't really have anything special that we're going to talk about, but they create the superior portion of the nasal area. We have two lacrimal bones that help make up the medial portion of the orbit. They are right there. That little foramen right there is where your tear ducts are. It's called the nasolacrimal groove. That's the nasolacrimal groove. Palatine bones. Oh, these are white ones. Let's see if I can isolate them. They're hard to see if you don't. Oh. Yeah, I'm a little too far, I think. It's the vomer, sphenoid, palatine. Okay. Multi-selection. Isolate. These palatine bones, they have these horizontal plates. These horizontal plates create the posterior portion of the hard palate or the bony roof of the mouth. That's just their main function. Then we have the vomer. Vomer makes the inferior portion of the septum. It's just a little tiny bone. Not really all that crazy. That portion right there that makes up the inferior portion of the septum is called the vertical plate. Then we have the inferior nasal concha. Oh, exit. There are two of these make up the bony lateral portions of your nostrils. These ones are even smaller. Alright, that does it for the facial bones. Next, we'll be going over the vertebrae.